This content is intended solely to inform and entertain. Connect the dots. The siege begins, aircraft carriers, bombers, and the collapse in the Caribbean. Welcome to the Geopolitics Update channel. Monday, November 17, 2025. In the heavy silence of the morning, the world woke up to signs of war. The largest U.S. aircraft carrier, the Gerald Ford, pushed through the Caribbean escorted by its strike group. This was not just a naval maneuver, it was the biggest show of force since the Gulf conflict, a clear warning that Caracas was in the crosshairs. Marine Corps F-35s tore across the skies in routine flights, while B-52 bombers crossed the Venezuelan coast. Flight radar tracked every move, revealing this was no innocent drill but a calculated choreography of power. On the other side, Venezuela's Air Force responded with F-16 maneuvers over Maracaibo. 4 aircraft crossed the airspace in a show of resistance. But the technological gap was brutal, improvised fighters against 8-engine bombers. The scene exposed the imbalance of power. Submarines loaded with fentanyl were intercepted before reaching U.S. territory. One was neutralized according to military reports, reinforcing the zero-tolerance narrative. Yet the question remains, to what extent is this war on drugs a facade to justify permanent military presence? In Curaçao, a seaplane linked to transnational trafficking networks requested to return after encountering U.S. bombers and fighters. The pilot claimed a medical emergency. The panic was so visceral that speculation rose the passenger suffered a physical collapse. A perfect metaphor, fear in the face of the war machine. Politically, contradictory signals emerged. Trump projected tension and intimidation but avoided openly embracing full escalation. Venezuelan generals like Zapatero were cited as pillars of the regime, accused of hostile interference. Caracas mocked, saying the American empire lived like a bad Hollywood movie. The Senate rejected a proposal that would limit the president's authority to launch military operations without legislative approval. Presidential freedom was preserved. Russia offered military support to Caracas. Maduro responded with an emotional speech, recalling his humble beginnings in the Caracas subway. But tears did not change the fact, the siege was set. The Caribbean was no longer sea, it was a trench. Trump announced he would turn tariffs into social policy. He promised direct payments of $2,000 to low-income Americans, converting the tariff surge into domestic stimulus. His message was clear, critics of tariffs were missing the point, as the United States now presented itself as the richest and most respected nation in the world, with minimal inflation and record-breaking stock markets. The $37 trillion debt began to be tackled with new investments. Factories and plants sprang up across different states, and the promised dividend was $2,000 per person. Social justice in the form of a check, except for the wealthiest. Economic populism was taking shape. Trump attacked the previous model, saying there would be no more hundreds of billions for insurance companies tied to Obamacare. The money should go directly to the people. Improvements would be tangible, and reports indicated the deep state reacted with concern after CNN released devastating news. Subpoenas dated from 2017 were sent to intelligence figures, investigating meat companies and price manipulation. Meanwhile, immigration policy hardened. Authorities reinforced measures against irregular entry. Amid heated debates in Congress, the Russian gate returned to the scene, revealing hidden names and connections. Pharmaceutical executives were investigated after mysterious collapses inside the White House, allegedly linked to experimental acoustic technologies. In international trade, China suspended rare earth export restrictions for 1 year, meeting Trump's demand. the flow of essential materials for high-tech batteries resumed. Trump reiterated his desire to meet Vladimir Putin in Hungary, and after talks with Xi Jinping, Beijing suspended agricultural tariffs for 1 year. Military operations expanded to El Salvador, while Japan warned that a Chinese attack on Taiwan could mobilize its self-defense forces. Israel faced reports accusing it of funding digital campaigns to manipulate algorithms and favor left-wing parties, censoring conservative voices. In Colombia, Gustavo Petro used metaphors of eagles and condors to criticize Trump and Senator Marco Rubio, promising continental resistance. At the same time, naval operations reported the sinking of vessels carrying illicit cargo in the Gulf of Urabá. Times Square became the stage for religious demonstrations under rain, while in Gaza images showed destruction caused by Israeli strikes. A study revealed that 86% of positive PCR tests for COVID were considered false, exposing a global scandal. Economic populism and international siege crossed in invisible lines. Kyiv plunged into darkness. Blackouts of 12 to 14 hours a day were reported, the direct result of Russian attacks on electrical infrastructure. Ukraine's capital lived in permanent blackout, a sign the war was no longer confined to trenches but had reached everyday life. In the United States, Defense Secretary Peter Hegseth confirmed that, under President Trump's orders, 2 strikes were carried out against ships linked to transnational trafficking networks in the Eastern Pacific. The vessels were sunk in international waters, 6 people neutralized according to military reports, with no American casualties. The message was clear: zero tolerance against cartels. Nicolas Maduro, under pressure, hinted at amnesty to avoid becoming the example of a defeated dictator. But analysts warned, a military strike against Caracas would drastically reshape the global economy. Oil markets could explode, directly impacting Vladimir Putin and export networks. Journalists noted that no military operation of this magnitude had been seen since the Gulf. The only acceptable outcome would be victory, meaning Maduro's removal. The Venezuelan leader himself tried to evoke Vietnam as inspiration for guerrillas, but the disparity of forces made the comparison fragile. Meanwhile, in Washington, the Senate approved a bill to end the government shutdown. The White House signaled reopening was imminent. Republicans and Democrats negotiated, but Trump insisted no resources would go to undocumented immigrants. The deal seemed close to conclusion. Trump's lawyers demanded retraction from the British broadcaster for allegedly misleading edits of presidential speeches. The threat was a multi-billion-dollar lawsuit. At the same time, the president announced the current financial system was obsolete and would be replaced by a new structure based on blockchain and cryptocurrencies. Trump reinforced that tariffs would be converted into social dividends. $2,000 monthly for low-income families, while the surplus would be used to reduce the national debt, already above $38 trillion. The seizure of a Venezuelan state-owned oil company plane in the United States showed sanctions were not just rhetoric. The BBC faced internal resignations after accusations of altering speeches. The scandal exposed cracks between historic allies. The world is no longer multipolar. It is a stage of open disputes. The White House responded to resignations at the British broadcaster, accusing journalists of manipulating presidential speeches. Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt stated that distortions of narratives would not be tolerated. The clash with international media exposed cracks between historic allies. In Washington, Syria's embassy announced its reopening after 11 years. Trump declared it an honor to meet the new Syrian leader, once a fighter in extremist groups, now turned ally. The Middle East was reshaping itself through unlikely alliances. Trump emphasized that tariffs were instruments of power. Hundreds of billions collected in his first term, tariffs up to 150% on pharmaceutical companies, factories returning to American soil. The message was clear: negotiations with Xi Jinping would only happen from a position of strength. At the same time, Trump criticized the massive influx of Chinese students, saying that 600,000 could lead to half of U.S. universities shutting down. His speech aligned with the Make America Great Again slogan. Diplomatic ceremonies took place in Washington, with India's ambassadors sworn in. The president called on the Supreme Court to review convictions, while Marco Rubio praised his leadership. The 250th anniversary of the Marine Corps was celebrated as a symbol of American strength. Bernie Sanders attacked Obamacare as a disaster, calling for universal free health care. The FDA announced the removal of warnings on hormonal therapies, adjusting protocols. Reports emerged about the closure of LGBT shelters in Sao Paulo, while military documents alleged that 2,500 American children were at risk in Venezuela and Colombia. Satellites revealed smuggling networks, and Navy SEALs were prepared for extraction operations. The FBI director traveled secretly to Beijing to discuss fentanyl trafficking with Xi Jinping. Voting machines linked to Dominium were abandoned, ending suspicions of manipulation. In Memphis, federal forces executed more than 1,000 warrants, including operations against drug networks. Reports indicated large-scale arrests. Time magazine published that Benjamin Netanyahu should kneel before Trump, while New York police officers requested mass resignations. Netanyahu appeared in reports as a central figure in covert operations. Celebrities surfaced in parallel notes. Jim Carrey and Taylor Momsen reunited. Sylvester Stallone left New York saying the city had lost its identity. Reports spoke of clones and stand-ins replacing public figures, while maps of underground tunnels were censored. The underground and the visible crossed in lines of power. Reports emerged about collapsing digital and financial networks. Hackers crossed invisible borders, hitting banks and energy systems. The British broadcaster spoke of coordinated attacks on financial platforms, while court documents revealed shadowy connections between corporations and governments. In the United States, FEMA warned of infrastructure risks. The TSA reinforced airport protocols, but flight cancellations multiplied. The shutdown still echoed, exposing internal fragility. In Latin America, the National Congress debated emergency measures, while the Electoral Court spoke of digital security. Xi Jinping delivered a speech on technological sovereignty, declaring algorithmic control a strategic weapon. Putin responded with promises of electronic monitoring as national defense. Digital chaos mixed with narco-trafficking. Transnational trafficking networks used cryptocurrencies to launder money, while military operations reported interceptions of submarines and boats carrying illicit cargo. The Gulf of Urabá became the stage for invisible confrontations. Israel faced accusations of funding digital campaigns to manipulate algorithms and censor conservative voices. Netanyahu appeared in reports as a central figure in covert operations. The Middle East burned in propaganda and psychological warfare. Behind the scenes, reports alleged that American children were at risk in Venezuela and Colombia. Satellites revealed clandestine routes, and Navy SEALs were prepared for extraction missions. The underground became as threatening as the visible. The digital and physical worlds no longer have borders. Final reports spoke of internal fissures in the American system. Congress debated emergency measures, but tension between Republicans and Democrats persisted. The deal to end the government shutdown seemed close, but every vote was treated as a battle. Trump reinforced that tariffs would be used to pay down the national debt and distribute social dividends. His speech was populist and strategic, $2,000 monthly for low-income families, while trillions collected would go toward debt repayment. Economic populism became a geopolitical weapon. In Latin America, military operations continued. Submarines intercepted, vessels sunk, transnational trafficking networks dismantled. The Gulf of Urabá and the Caribbean were stages for invisible confrontations. Maduro tried to resist with emotional speeches, but international pressure mounted. Israel faced accusations of digital manipulation, while Netanyahu appeared in reports as a central figure in covert operations. Gaza remained in ruins, and the Middle East burned in propaganda and psychological warfare. In Europe, blackouts in Kyiv showed the war was no longer just military but also energy-based. Putin used the electrical collapse as a weapon, while Xi Jinping spoke of technological sovereignty. The world split between narratives and algorithms. Behind the scenes, reports alleged that American children were at risk in Venezuela and Colombia. Satellites revealed clandestine routes, and Navy SEALs were prepared for extraction missions. The underground became as threatening as the visible. The cycle closed with the same message: there are no longer borders between war, economy, and technology. The world is no longer multipolar. It is a trench. End of the report, folks. Don't forget to subscribe, turn on notifications, and join the conversation in the comments. If you'd like to support us directly, consider making a donation using the link in the description or the QR code on screen. Your contribution helps us work better, and keeps this project alive and independent. Thank you so much. And see you in the next report. This content is a narrative adaptation based on public themes of global geopolitics. The version presented has been transformed with a unique style, based on public information, analysis, and opinions, and is intended solely to inform and entertain. Connect the dots.